Let's jump right in. Some people carry so much power that when they go silent, rooms feel it. When they stop texting, phones stay dry. When they walk away, even the ground they once stood on feels colder. And not because they were loud, not because they were flashy or dramatic, but because their energy was a mirror, and when it vanishes, people are left with only their own reflection. That's the weight of someone who never needed the spotlight to be noticed. Just their absence was enough to make the world wonder where they went. See, in a world that glorifies noise, replies, reactions, receipts, explanations, there's something deeply unsettling about someone who just stops showing up. Not with malice, not with revenge, just with silence. And it's not that they disappeared. They just stopped responding the way others were used to. They stopped explaining themselves, stopped rescuing, stopped being emotionally available for people who only ever came around when they needed something. And when that happens, the shift is deafening, because emotional unavailability isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It's the realization that your peace is more sacred than someone else's comfort. When you're someone who feels deeply, listens fully, and gives freely, your presence becomes a form of emotional oxygen. People inhale you. They rely on your nods, your attention, your warmth, your, "Yes, I understand." You become their mirror, their support beam, their invisible safety net. But what happens when that energy pulls back? When you go quiet? What happens when you stop performing emotional CPR for people who flatlined on you long ago? They notice. Not immediately, maybe, but eventually, something feels missing. Suddenly, the world doesn't feel as validating. Conversations don't feel as safe. The emotional sponge they used to squeeze dry is no longer within reach. And what's wild is this: you don't even have to say anything. Just your stillness, your lack of response is a message, louder than a speech, more effective than any confrontation. Because here's the thing. People get used to your patterns. You always replying within seconds. You always showing up. Even when you're tired. You always giving the benefit of the doubt. They build entire expectations on your generosity. They form emotional routines around your kindness. And when you break that rhythm, even gently, it unsettles them. Not because you've hurt them, but because you've stopped feeding a system they depended on without realizing it. Your silence becomes a crack in their mirror. Moment where they're forced to see their own behavior without your emotional cushioning. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But let's flip that. Everything that irritates others about your silence might actually be revealing what they refuse to confront in themselves, because your silence removes the distraction. It takes you, your empathy, your explanations, your emotional labor, out of the equation, and suddenly, they're left with themselves, and they don't like what they see. You see, silence is not absence, it's not ghosting, it's not playing games, it's simply you taking your power back, because sometimes the most profound transformation doesn't come from saying more, it comes from saying less, from choosing to be unavailable, from letting the echoes do the talking. And in that space, that sacred space of no response, the world begins to shift. Not because you shouted, but because you finally whispered, "Enough." Silence then is not an act of revenge, it's recovery. But before you find that quiet, you must walk through the noise of always saying yes, always picking up, always fixing. Let's talk about the price you paid just for being available. Availability feels like love. That's what we were taught, right? That being there for people, being reachable, responsive, involved, that's what good people do. So you stretch yourself. Answer texts at 2 a.m. Make time for the call even when your soul is begging for rest. You cancel plans for others. You squeeze yourself smaller so they can feel seen. And in that you start disappearing, not all at once, not in a dramatic fall, but slowly, through little sacrifices, unpaid emotional bills, one-sided conversations, unmatched effort, until you look in the mirror one day and wonder, where did I go? You can't keep withdrawing from a bank account you never deposit into. And yet you did, day after day. You gave advice you needed yourself. You poured water from a cup already cracked. You clapped for people who never showed up for your wins. You remembered everyone's birthdays, showed up at everyone's crisis, supported every fragile ego. And when it was your turn to fall? Silence, echoes, excuses. You became the background noise to other people's main event, and you started believing. Maybe that's all you were meant to be. You know the role, the strong one, the dependable one, the friend who has it all together, the one people call when they're falling apart, but never think to check on. That label sounds like a compliment, but it's a cage, because strength doesn't mean invincible, and being dependable doesn't mean dispensable. But that's how it plays out. They only reach for you when they need something. They forget you're not an emergency room. You're a person, with limits, with emotions, with days when you just want to be held, not held accountable. You know what being too available really costs you? It costs you your own healing, your time, your energy, your ability to just be. Because when you're always on call, always checking in, always anticipating the next crisis, you never rest. Not truly. Even your peace feels like waiting for the next alarm bell. You start living on emotional caffeine, hyped up on other people's urgency, running on fumes, smiling through burnout, and worst of all, people don't thank you. They get used to you. They expect you, until your kindness becomes background noise, not a gift, a guarantee. And then, you say it. That first, no. That first, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. That first boundary, it feels like a betrayal to them and to yourself. Because you've been so wired to serve, it almost feels wrong to sit down, to rest, to protect your own heart. But that no is sacred. It's not rejection. It's recognition. That you are no longer willing to bleed for people who don't even notice you're wounded. You are not a lifeline. You are a life, not a vending machine for support, not a therapist on standby, not a crisis hotline for people who disappear when you're drowning. You are allowed to be seen, not just used. You are allowed to be heard, not just helpful. And yes, you are allowed to be unavailable, because your worth is not tied to how quickly you show up for everyone else. Sometimes the most loving thing you can say is, not right now, I'm healing, and that changes everything. You smile, you nod, you say of course, but inside something winces, something tightens. It's that quiet voice in your soul, whispering, no, but the mask doesn't listen, because the mask has a job, to be liked, to be safe, to be available, even if it means you disappear. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask we wear to meet the world. It isn't evil. It was built to protect, to help us function, to belong. But somewhere along the line it stops being armor and becomes a prison. You don't just wear the mask, you become it. And when people fall in love with your mask, you learn to fear the moment they see what's underneath. You say yes. Not because you want to, but because no feels dangerous. You show up. Not because you have space, but because absence feels like guilt. You over-explain, over-defend, over-justify, because silence feels like rejection. But let's be honest, when your need for approval outweighs your self-respect, you don't show up in relationships. You vanish. You give access to a version of yourself you've sculpted for survival, while the real you waits quietly in the wings, hoping someone might notice that you're not okay. It's a full-time performance, and it's exhausting. You laugh when you're confused. You smile when you're hurt. You agree when you're breaking inside, and why? Because the persona is programmed for applause, and every boundary feels like a boo from the crowd. You learn to perform intimacy without ever being known. You become emotionally available, to everyone but yourself. And they love it. They love your mask, your role, your always there availability. Until one day, you realize you've built an entire identity based on who people needed you to be, and not who you really are. Underneath it all is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being too much or not enough. The persona was built in the moments. You were made to feel that being yourself wasn't safe. Maybe it started in childhood where love was earned, not given. Or maybe it was a relationship where your truth was inconvenient. So you shapeshifted. You edited yourself. You smiled through the pain, because that's what kept people around. But now you feel hollow. Because love that's earned by pretending never really lands. You became the peacemaker, the go-to, the strong one, and nobody checked to see if the strong one was okay, because your mask looked fine. But inside, you were cracking. You became fluent in emotional labor, but foreign to your own needs. You showed up to their emergencies but missed your own breakdowns. You watered their gardens until you forgot you were wilting. And now the silence screams, where were you in all of this? Here's the paradox. The first time you say no, your hands shake. The first time you don't explain yourself, you panic. The first time you put your phone on silent and choose yourself, you feel guilty, because for so long you equated availability with love. But it wasn't love. It was obligation. And love, real love, doesn't require your disappearance. It doesn't punish your no. It doesn't only applaud you when you're self-abandoning. It sees the soul beneath the mask and says, you can rest now. You were always the lead in everyone else's story, supporting character in your own. But now you step back on your stage. Not the stage built by approval, not the one managed by fear. Your real stage, where your voice cracks, but still speaks, where your needs matter, even if they inconvenience others. Where you don't owe anyone a version of yourself that costs you your peace. You're done auditioning for love you don't even believe in anymore. When you take off the mask, you won't just lose people. You'll lose the illusion of being loved for something you're not. And that's painful, but necessary, because the persona served its purpose. It kept you safe until you were ready to be seen. Now you're ready. Not to be liked, but to be known, to be real, to be whole. And that is the most sacred kind of goodbye, the one where you say farewell to the mask and finally come home to yourself. Every sigh, every overreaction, every over-explained text costs you something, but it's not money. It's energy, psychic energy, and like a leaking wallet, you don't notice what you've lost until you're emotionally bankrupt, and by then, the damage has already been done. Carl Jung didn't just study the mind, he studied the soul. And one of his most vital ideas was this. We each carry psychic energy, the invisible currency of attention, emotion, and willpower. It's not endless. It's not free. It powers our choices, our focus, our healing. But we spend it, leak it, on things that don't serve us, until there's nothing left for the things that do. No wonder peace feels expensive. You've already paid too much for chaos. Let's be honest. You don't lose energy randomly. You spend it. Every time you reread that conversation, you swipe your soul's credit card. Every time you rehearse your comebacks in the shower, you drain your emotional checking account. You overthink, overanalyze, overmonitor, all in the name of trying to understand. But understanding doesn't come through spirals. It comes through stillness. And here's the truth. Most of what drains you isn't what happened. It's your resistance to it. Jung warned us, what you resist persists. It's not just a clever quote. It's physics for the soul. Because when you resist a feeling, you don't remove it. You recycle it, again and again. Like emotional debt compounded by interest. You argue with reality as if you could negotiate peace with what's already happened. You suffer the event then suffer it again in memory, again in anticipation, again in regret. All because part of you believes that if you think hard enough, you'll change the past. But all you've changed is your present into a battlefield. Overthinking isn't harmless. It's expensive. Every loop you replay takes from your ability to feel. You don't just lose time, you lose clarity. You drown in assumptions and hypothetical reactions in imagined scenarios where you always lose. And why? Because overthinking is emotional procrastination, a way to feel in control when your heart is in chaos. But here's the trap. You don't solve anything in your head. You just relive it. Like watching the same scene from different angle. Shopping, the ending will change. It never does. You just end up exhausted. Let's go deeper. Rumination is not reflection. It's repetition. It's your soul trapped in a loop of should have, could have, what if. It feels involuntary, but at its core, rumination is an unconscious agreement to suffer again. It's your psyche saying, I didn't get closure, so I'll keep reliving the pain until I do. But closure doesn't come from looping. It comes from letting go, and you can't let go if you're still holding on to the hope that it will finally make sense. Some wounds don't need sense. They need silence. This kind of fatigue is different. It's not just, I need a nap, tired. It's, I don't even have the energy to feel anymore, tired. It's when your body shows up, but your spirit doesn't. You answer texts you don't want to read, smile in rooms where you feel invisible. Say, I'm okay, when you're quietly unraveling. That's not laziness. That's spiritual vulnerability. It's what happens when your energy is scattered on 1,000 unhealed wounds, and none of them are yours to carry anymore. You can't rebuild your peace if you're always available for war. And here's the cruel twist. The more tired you are, the easier you are to manipulate, because exhaustion lowers your defenses. You say yes when you want to say no. You agree to things just to end the conversation. You believe people, not because they're honest, but because you don't have the energy to question them anymore. You confuse relief with trust, but they're not the same. Manipulators don't always break you sometimes. They just wait until you're too tired to protect yourself, and call it love, call it connection, call it fate. But it's not. It's just another leak in your soul's economy. So what now? You learn to invest wisely. You stop giving energy to ghosts. You stop scrolling through pain like it's going to offer a discount. You ask, is this thought charging me or charging me up? You conserve. You protect. You learn that peace isn't passive. It's strategic. It's choosing not to engage in every argument, every trigger, every invisible war, because not every hill is yours to die on. And some of them, you built them yourself. Your energy is sacred. It's not infinite. It's not disposable. It deserves a budget. It deserves intention. Because this life, this one precious life, it runs on the power of what you give your attention to. So reclaim your attention. Reclaim your breath. Reclaim the hours you used to spend trying to be understood by people who were never listening. You're not here to fund chaos. You're here to fund healing. And that starts by noticing what you're spending your soul, and deciding finally to save some for yourself. They don't yell. They don't threaten. They don't raise a hand. They don't have to. All they need is a sigh, a pause, a look of disappointment. And just like that, you're explaining, apologizing, proving. They didn't push. They pulled on a wire you didn't know was still exposed. That's a trigger, not a flaw, but a map to the parts of you still held hostage. Your triggers aren't random. They're coded memories. Residual charges from wounds that were never witnessed, never heard, never healed. When someone pulls that thread, you don't just react. You relive. You become 7 again, 12 again, back in the room, where silence felt like punishment or love felt like performance. People don't control you with power. They control you with pattern. That's the trap. They don't need chains. They just need your reaction. There's a reason it's always them. That one friend, that one lover, that one parent. Every time they call, you brace yourself. Every time they text, your stomach tightens, and yet, you still pick up, still answer, still feel obligated. That's not loyalty. That's programming. You're reacting to a script you didn't write but learned to perform, because being needed felt like being loved, because being useful was how you stayed safe. Have you noticed? The same conversation, the same guilt trip, the same emotional boomerang, different faces, same impact. Repetition isn't coincidence, it's the soul saying, this is where you're still bound. You react because something in you still seeks approval, still wants to be understood, still hopes they'll finally see you. But here's the truth. The more you try to prove your heart, the easier it is for others to bypass it. Manipulation doesn't always sound like, do this for me. Sometimes it sounds like, oh, okay. I guess I'll just handle it myself. It's fine. You're busy. It's not loud. It's subtle. It hides in sighs, in delays, in pauses designed to make you feel selfish for setting a boundary. That's not love. That's training. You've been trained to confuse guilt with responsibility, to feel bad for choosing yourself, but the only thing you're betraying when you keep saying yes out of fear is yourself. Control isn't always aggressive, it's responsive. A look that makes you over-explain, a silence that makes you reach out first, a mood shift that makes you backtrack. They don't need to raise their voice, they just raise your anxiety. Because control isn't about domination, it's about anticipation. They've studied your rhythm, they know where you flinch, and every time you react, you hand over your power in the name of peace. Now watch what happens when you don't respond, when you don't explain, don't rush to fix, don't answer the guilt. They panic, not because you're wrong, but because you stopped being useful. Your silence breaks the transaction, and suddenly, they don't know who they are without your emotional labor. That's not your crisis, that's their reckoning. Let them sit in it. You've spent enough years being their cushion. Let's make it real. The friend who only calls when she's in chaos. Never asks how you are. But if you don't pick up, you're the bad one. The partner who ghosts for days, but the moment you detach, they come back with poetry. Not love, just pull. The family member who demands your time, your presence, your help, but can't remember your last win, your last struggle, your last anything. You're not in a relationship. You're in a role. And the moment you stop performing, they act betrayed. Somewhere along the way, you learned, if I'm not useful, I'm not lovable. And so you became everything. The fixer, the listener, the one who stays calm when everyone else explodes. And it worked. You got applause, attention, but never peace. Because peace doesn't live in performance, it lives in presence. And you were too busy earning space to actually take space. That's not love. That's labor. So what now? Now you stop dancing to their tension. Now you stop explaining your no. Now you honor the part of you that feels guilty but doesn't cave. This is the beginning of sovereignty. Silence. Stillness. Boundaries without essays. You're not cold. You're clear. And clarity always offends those who benefited from your confusion. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them adjust. You've adjusted enough for everyone else's comfort. You don't win this battle by being louder. You win it by being still. By not chasing. Not explaining. Not justifying your worth to people who only see your value when it serves their emptiness. Let silence be your firewall. Let boundaries be your compass. Not to shut people out, but to finally find out who's willing to stay when they can't feed on your reaction anymore. You are not their trigger to pull. You are not their role to fill. You are not their guilt to carry. You are free. Say no and watch everything change. Not just schedules, but stories. Not just dynamics, but identities. Because when you stop playing the role, you don't just break a pattern. You shatter the mirror others used to see themselves. You weren't. Just in their life, you were their reflection. And now there's a crack in the image they curated. That's what breaks when you say no. Not you. Them. You were never just you. You were the rescuer, the pleaser, the buffer. the one who made peace, who softened the edges, who showed up, even when your soul stayed home. They projected roles onto you, and you, believing it meant love, played them beautifully. But here's the truth. The roles were never about you. They were about their comfort, their image, their unhealed needs, and the moment you step off that stage, the audience gets angry. Not because the play was bad, but because the illusion is gone. They don't miss you. They miss the version of you that made them feel safe. They miss the you that didn't ask questions, that said yes before thinking, that made life convenient. You were their soft landing, and now you've grown a spine. You were their echo, and now you've found your voice. That's not betrayal, that's evolution. And when you evolve, they either adapt or attack. Silence is loud to someone who's used to your noise. Silence is violence to those who needed your energy to avoid their own. When you stop engaging, you force them into a room with someone they've been avoiding their whole life, themselves. Your absence becomes a mirror they didn't ask for, and most people don't want clarity, they want comfort, even if that comfort means your exhaustion. Jung called it the shadow, the part of us we deny, reject, project. And when you withdraw your performance, you hand them back their shadow. Some will sit with it, integrate it, heal. But many, they'll panic, they'll project harder, they'll call you cold, selfish, arrogant, detached. Not because you've become any of those things, but because you stopped being their mask, and now they're naked in front of their own chaos. You're not just dealing with one person's discomfort, you're battling a culture that taught you saying no is selfish. Choosing rest is lazy. Silence is rudeness. Boundaries are rejection. So when you reclaim your energy, expect guilt to show up, not because you've done wrong, but because guilt was wired into your nervous system as a consequence of authenticity. That's not your fault. That's the programming. Shame will knock too. It always does. Who do you think you are? The answer: someone who finally remembered. Refusal isn't rejection, it's redirection. It's you saying, this doesn't serve my truth anymore. And that's terrifying to those who relied on your compliance. Your no is not an insult. It's a declaration of presence, of clarity, of soul. There's power in that pause, the one where you don't respond right away. Power in that breath where you choose yourself before choosing convenience. Power in refusal, because it reveals what was built on dependency instead of connection. Most manipulation doesn't scream. It whispers, it sighs, it delays. It says, I guess I'll manage. And you rush in because empathy trained you to decode hints as emergencies. But manipulation, especially the soft kind, is still control. It just wears a kinder tone. You don't owe rescue to anyone who won't speak their need directly. And you don't owe access to anyone who punishes your boundaries with withdrawal or guilt. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That's what you've been undoing. The fate you didn't choose, the roles you didn't ask for, the patterns you didn't question. Shadow work isn't about becoming someone new, it's about owning all that you are, even the parts that say no, even the parts that disappoint, even the parts that trigger others because you finally stopped betraying yourself. Integration means this: you no longer need their comfort to validate your clarity. Let them call you what they will. Let them twist your silence into sin. Let them paint your growth as betrayal. You are not here to be a projection. You are not here to be a mask. You are not here to cushion others from their awakening. You are here to become whole. And wholeness demands honesty, boundaries, refusal, distance, stillness. You don't shatter the mirror to hurt anyone. You shatter it so you can finally see yourself clearly, and maybe if they're brave, they'll pick up the pieces and see themselves too. But that's not your job. Your job was to say no and mean it. Silence is not emptiness. It is not weakness. It is not the absence of voice. It is the presence of something deeper, of awareness, of boundaries, of sovereignty. In a world addicted to noise, Silence is rebellion. In a society that equates visibility with value, silence is a sacred weapon, and when wielded with intention, it doesn't just protect your peace, it reclaims your power. We live in a time where being loud is mistaken for being alive, where constant explanation is expected, where reaction is currency and stillness is suspicion. People ask, "Why are you so quiet?" As if noise is proof of truth. But some truths don't need sound. Some boundaries don't need announcements, and some shifts happen in silence, because the soul doesn't scream. It knows. And when you begin to trust that knowing, you stop chasing clarity through chaos. Let them misinterpret your silence. Let them label it passive, avoidant, cold. Because what they call retreat is actually recalibration. You're not hiding, you're listening, not to them, but to yourself. Silence is not what happens when you run out of things to say. It's what happens when your words are no longer willing to beg for understanding. You've said enough. You've explained enough. You've poured and bled and bent. Now, you return to the only voice that never lied to you, your own. Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." And silence, real silence, is the door to that awakening. In stillness you hear what the world drowns out, the tug in your gut, the pattern in your pain, the whisper of intuition you once ignored to keep the peace. Noise kept you distracted. Silence keeps you honest. And from that honesty comes a new kind of power, one that doesn't need to prove itself, because it already is. You are not withdrawing to punish. You are withdrawing to protect, to preserve, to prune. You don't disappear to hurt others. You disappear to find what remains when you're no longer performing, and what remains is you, your center, your clarity, your presence. Because presence isn't just being in a room, it's being in your body, your breath, your boundary. And sometimes the only way to return to yourself is to walk away from the noise that made you forget who you were. Silence reveals what chaos conceals. When you stop explaining, you start observing. When you stop reacting, you start recognizing. That friend who only calls when they need something. That lover who disappears when you say no. That family member who guilt trips your distance. These patterns, once invisible, begin to pulse in the quiet. You don't need closure from them. The silence gave it to you, not in a grand speech, but in a subtle, sacred knowing. This is what it always was, and that's enough. You can't heal in the same room where your soul was suffocated. You can't reclaim your voice in a place where your silence was punished. Distance is not disconnection, it's devotion to truth, to self-respect, to nervous system. Emotional distance is not a wall. It's a boundary with wisdom. It says, I need space to hear myself again, because you forgot how to listen, while you were busy translating yourself for others. And now, you're learning to be fluent in your own energy. You are no longer begging to be seen in places that dim your light. You are no longer proving your worth through availability. Love is not measured by access. Presence is not the same as proof. Let go of the connections that only survive through your effort. Let go of the roles that silence your soul. Let go of the echoes that never return. Silence is not the absence of connection. It's the filter that reveals which connections were real and which were rehearsed. You don't owe your energy to those who haven't earned your silence. You don't owe your presence to spaces that punish your truth. You don't owe your story to those who distort your stillness into selfishness. Your silence is not void. It is volume in another language, a language of boundaries, of clarity, of power. And if they cannot hear you in silence, they were never truly listening in noise. So speak without speaking. Withdraw without apology. Pause without permission. Because sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is stop talking and still be heard. You've spoken, you've pleaded, you've tried. Now let silence speak. Let silence draw the line. Let silence end the performance, close the loop, reclaim the stage. Let it echo through the spaces you used to fill. And if they miss you, let them meet themselves in that emptiness. because you've met yourself there, and you didn't abandon you. That's the beginning of real peace. That's the alchemy of soul. And that's where your voice, even in silence, becomes sacred. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, if it helped you feel seen in the silence, don't let it fade. Hit that like button to keep this kind of content flowing, and subscribe for more bold, soul-stirring truths. Share this with someone who's learning to choose themselves too. Remember, your silence is not emptiness, it's power, it's clarity, it's sacred. So take a breath, honor your boundaries, and walk forward with peace. Because sometimes, the loudest transformation happens in quiet. Until next time, stay bold, stay true, and never apologize for the space you need to heal.